You know how sometimes a meal leaves you energized and other times sluggish, foggy, or even hungrier? That may be your glucose talking. Foods that are sugar and carb heavy, and you know my experience here, cause your body's glucose levels to spike, often followed by a crash. This matters because it turns out 88% of us have suboptimal metabolic health. So glucose could be the next big thing to track when it comes to health. That's why we're excited about Lingo, a new biowearable from Abbott that tracks your glucose in real time.
I've been wearing Lingo for weeks now, and I've learned that for my body, if I move around after I eat a meal, my spike is much more gradual, much lower. And so I've learned that I just need to get up and move around after I eat. What works for me might work very differently for you, but that's what works for my body. To see how your body responds to food and learn what you can do to improve your metabolism, try Lingo. It starts at $49 for a 2-week plan, no prescription needed. For a limited time, save 10% on your first order with Happier at HelloLingo.com.
The Lingo glucose system is for users 18 years and older, not on insulin. It is not intended for diagnosis of diseases, including diabetes. For more information, please visit HelloLingo.com/US.
Lemonada.
Hello and welcome to Happier, a podcast where we talk about ideas and strategies for making our lives happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative. This week, we'll talk about some advice you might take from a college freshman. Spoiler alert, that freshman is my daughter. And a hack for late night snacking. I'm Gretchen Rubin, a writer who studies happiness, good habits, human nature, secrets of adulthood. I'm in New York City in my little home office. And joining me today from Los Angeles is my sister, Elizabeth Kraft. And Elizabeth, everybody is very relieved to hear that you are back at home.
Yes. That's me, Elizabeth Kraft, a TV writer and producer living in LA. And yes, Gretch, we're back at home. We were evacuated from our house in Encino for a week, but we're very lucky. Nothing happened to our neighborhood. It was so nice how many people reached out to see how I was doing. It has been a very tough time in Los Angeles. It's going to be, for a long time. But thank goodness for all the firefighters and first responders and everybody who has been working on these fires. Hopefully we're on the other side of it.
Yeah, let's hope. In other news, we talk a lot about the 25 for 25 list, and I was very intrigued by, Elizabeth, your writing partner is Sarah Fain. She's the co-host of the Happier in Hollywood podcast with you. And Sarah is like such a note taker and course taker and journal keeper. She's very much that way. And she's also an overbuyer. So I was so interested in episode 401, where she talked about, she has this very unusual twist on how she's doing her 25 and 25. Explain for people who didn't listen to that episode of Happier in Hollywood.
Yes. So Sarah's 25 things in 25 is the categories of things she's not buying.
Because she is an overbuyer.
Yes.
Self-declared. Yes.
Yes. And so she chose 25 things she's not going to buy. We shared it on the podcast. Some of the items are mugs, wool, because she knits and spins wool, furniture, bags and purses, puzzles. She said no new electronics, although she can replace one if she needs to.
Yes.
Towels, games, skincare. Again, she said she can replace it, but she can't get something that she's just experimenting with.
And on and on. I mean,
yes.
But it was funny because she was sort of like, we have so many games that we don't play. We can just play the games we have.
Yes.
Or like towels. We'll just use these towels.
Yes.
And so, but I thought that was such an interesting twist. And I have to say, when she started launching in, I'm like, how many categories is she going to come up with? But each one, you're like, yeah, I get it. Mugs. It's fun to buy a new mug, but you don't need that mug, probably.
Yeah. And it was funny because she was hesitating about doing it on the podcast. I kept saying, let's do your list. And she said, well, but then I'm really going to have to go through with it.
Obliger.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, of course, I'm there. I can keep tabs on her. So it's really interesting. Now, she will buy like secondhand furniture from Facebook Marketplace and things like that. So it's also got an environmental aspect to it. She's both interested in just not spending the money, but also in helping the environment.
Right.
So it's really interesting. We'll be, I'm sure touching back on it over the year.
Yeah.
By the way, Gretch, I have to remind everyone that Sarah and I now have a Substack.
Yes.
Which is really been fun. And we have a chat in our Substack. We're getting, a lot of people coming over and building our community. So if you want to subscribe, probably the easiest way is go to happierinhollywood.com. And if you scroll down, there's a place to put in your email address and you'll start getting our free weekly newsletter.
I like how you have like the funny little tiny video clips, like they're one of the two corgis running gleefully down the hotel room when you were evacuated. Like it was so cute. It was fun, like a little pick me up. Now, here's a note from a listener who had some really good reframing about my bad watercolor teacher. I talked about in episode 517 about how I had really allowed having a bad watercolor teacher to kind of occupy too much real estate in my brain and kind of sour me on watercolor. And I was trying to, now that I'm doing watercolor every day of the year in 2025, I really wanted to just let that go. And Annie had a good suggestion.
Yeah, she says, I just finished listening to episode 517 of the podcast and your discussion of your demerit. I struggle with this a lot. What sometimes helps me is to remind myself that everyone comes into our lives for a reason, even when the experience was negative. Maybe the negative experience with the teacher was a way of spurring you on to complete the habit of doing it every day because you wanted to prove to yourself and to her probably that you could do it, and you put it on your list again for this year to learn it. If everything had been perfect last year, you might have gotten bored with it and not persisted. And because you have access to good teachers this year, your enjoyment of the painting process is probably higher than it might have been last year because you're mastering skills that you struggled with last year. What an excellent reframing, Gretch, and very insightful.
Very insightful. And I found this really encouraging. And it's comforting because it's true. As she was describing this, I'm like, I think that's probably right. It's not like, oh, I took this class and now I'm done. Now I have to recommit myself in this new way. So I found that really encouraging. And it really did help me put aside my resentment of that teacher for like, oh, you wasted my time and my energy and my enthusiasm. And being like, you know what? It all worked out.
Yeah.
It all worked out. So thank you, Annie, for that reframe. We love a good reframing. It's always astonishing how effective just a reframing can be. One last note for listeners listening in January 2025, I am offering up to 50% off some of my very favorite items from thehappinessproject.com, the Memento Keepsake Journal, which I love, the Choose the Bigger Life mug, the Know Yourself Better journal set, Elizabeth's favorite Onward and Upward t-shirt. If you want to check it out, go to happiercast.com/sale before February 1st to get the discount. And if you're listening later, don't worry, you can still check it all out at happiercast.com/shop.
Exciting.
So, Elizabeth, this week, our Try This at Home suggestion is to take some advice from a college freshman. And you might think to yourself, why would I take advice from a college freshman? I'm not going to college. What does a college freshman have to say? But here's the thing. What I have found is that good advice for a particular category, even a very particular narrow category of people, almost always turns out to be good advice for me. It turns out that good advice, you might have to tinker with it and adapt it to your own circumstances. But I often find that reading good advice for people living in a mobile home or whatever, I'm like, that's really good advice for me too.
Yes, well, that's why we say treat yourself like a toddler, because have a nap, don't get too hungry. That's good advice for everybody.
Right. Exactly. So we thought we would talk to Eleanor. She is a college freshman. She is home on her very long winter holiday, about to head back to school in a few days. So we thought, let's hear what her advice might be for college freshmen or anybody else who can use that advice. Hello, Eleanor.
Hi, Eleanor.
Hello.
You're coming to us from the living room.
Yes, I am.
Yes, there's not room in my little home office for the two of us.
Nope.
Well, Eleanor, we are so excited to get advice from you because you are in the middle of your freshman year. So now you've been at school, you know what's working, what's not working.
Yeah.
Before we get to the actual school part, I want to ask about your gap year. So you took a gap year between high school and college. I'm just curious, do you recommend it for other people?
I definitely do. I think it was definitely the right move for me. I think it's important to have it all planned out, know what you're going to be doing, so you're not just sitting at home. But I loved it. I thought it was helpful for me to just felt like I knew myself a little more outside of a school setting and to know like what kind of people I want around me, what kind of things I want to do, what kind of things I'm interested in. And I feel like it really did help me clarify some things and also just get a sense of like there's a world outside of the school world. And for my friends who took gap years, I think they had similar experiences. And now I just feel like I'm a bit calmer. I'm a bit more able to kind of pull myself out of the like all encompassing, super immersive school environment, which can be a lot sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
Well, one question everybody wonders when it's their time is, what do you pack? So what is it that you packed that you were glad that you packed?
I will say there are a few like concrete items that I think are pretty much universally useful. I would say command hooks, which you, Mom, said that I got too many on our initial Target trip.
Yeah,
but
no,
I knew
was
I
like,
would need
this
them.
is simply improbable that one person could use this many command hooks. But you rose to the challenge.
I've heard you two mention these before, but I don't know what they are. So explain what a command hook is.
Just
magic.
Plastic.
They're weird. They're magic.
Just a plastic hook that's really durable that comes with strips. And the strips themselves are also very useful. I found that they're better for hanging up like posters and things than even masking tape. So that's kind of like a little bonus. But you just like stick them to the wall and then you can just hang anything on them. And I knew I would need a lot.
But the thing that makes them magical is that you can hang something heavy from a command hook, but then you can also easily remove the hook when it's time to move out and you don't damage the wall. And I don't understand how both things can be true. And yet they are.
Magic.
But very useful. And then I ended up getting more after. So I didn't even
all
have
different
enough.
Sizes. Yeah.
So I felt very vindicated. I would also say like just simple stackable like plastic drawers that can go under. I put them under my bed and that's just useful for like extra storage. But something that I think I didn't really do but I probably should have done just to narrow down what's good to have and what's good not to have is just to like in the week or two before you're going to be packing, just take note of everything you use in a week that you really can't live without. And then see, because I feel like there's probably some things that I didn't even think about that I used, like, I don't even know. I felt like I pretty much used everything that I brought. I didn't regret bringing anything. But I know there are people who bring, like, big appliances, like some people bring, like, vacuums and things like that. And then they're like, oh, well, I could have just gotten them at school. So I guess also knowing, like, what your school will provide. Also, like, what's in the area. Like, if there's, like, a big CVS or, like, a big Target or something nearby, then you don't necessarily need to bring everything with you. I think that would have been good for me to remember as well. Like you can get basics, but then, some schools are so off in the middle of nowhere that you can't really do that. So I think just having a good idea of what you use, what you like to have around you in your space is useful.
I would say from my observation from watching you move in and watching accounts of other people moving in is I think that for some people, maybe for some parents and for some children alike, there's sort of an urge to prepare. And the way that they can find an outlet for this desire to prepare is by buying stuff. But what I kept saying to you, and I felt vindicated, is you're not going to have very much space. And so don't get a lot of stuff that's going to take up a lot of space until you know that you're going to have a place to put it, because you don't want to be just crowded out by supplies, especially if you don't really know if you need those supplies.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes that urge to like, well, we're just going to account for every possible need that could ever arise. And that's going to be sort of like, now you're well prepared, but then you're sort of drowning in stuff.
Oh, well, I will say one thing I got, or multiple things I got that I didn't end up needing was notebooks. Because I just was like in the going back to school mindset.
Yeah.
But then at least for me, at least in my particular school experience, but I feel like it's probably universal, if you're taking more like humanities classes, anything other than pretty much like a math or maybe science class, you're mostly going to be doing things on your laptop. So I now have a bunch of nice blank notebooks that I have to find a new use for. So that would have probably been good for me to know.
That makes sense.
Also, like the ability to like get books out of the library instead of buying all of your books, things like that. The space thing. Although I will say, one thing that was nice for me was I knew that in order to like really feel at home and really feel like I was comfortable. I wanted to have a lot of decorations just because I'm
Yeah.
very maximalist.
Mm.
And so I brought a lot of that. And I was happy. I'm glad that I did.
Yes.
That was important for me. So I think also just,
Eleanor
yeah.
is an abundance lover.
Yeah.
And she
Yes.
brings that energy into every environment that she touches.
Yes. But it's appreciated by all of my friends and
No,
my
it looks
roommates.
great. Everybody enjoys it. Yeah, your roommates are very supportive.
They're very supportive, and
Yes.
it does make it feel homier. So I feel like
Yes.
if that's something that's important to you, that's good to keep in the back of your mind, because I feel like it helps me feel more like I've made it my own and it's like my little haven to go back to.
Well, what is some other advice about getting along with roommates, making new friends? It's such an overwhelming social experience. Do you have any advice for people?
A useful piece of advice that was given to me by my friends who had already been through their freshman year since I took a gap year
Mhm.
was just not to take things too seriously, like not to be immediately caught up in like the minute dramas and emotions, because it's very heightened and very
Yes.
panicky, and almost like there's kind of like a desperation
Uh-huh.
to everything,
Right.
because I think
Yes.
there's also the sense that college is where you meet your lifelong friends and like your soulmate and all these
So that
people who are
feels
going to
like
be in your
pressure.
life. Yeah, that's a lot of pressure to put on friendships. I think you can really feel that in the way that people interact with each other.
Mm.
And I think it makes it just, there's like a kind of weird frenzied feeling to it.
Mm.
And I think it's good to be like, I don't have to take everything super seriously. Like,
Mhm.
you can just let things be what they are. Things will fall into place. You're not going to find your perfect, I mean, maybe you will, but you probably won't find your perfect friend group the first month of college.
Right.
And so many people talk about like the sophomore year friend group breakup
Uh-huh.
that was formed in freshman year.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like keeping that in the back of my mind, not to be like, I know these people won't be here forever, but
Right.
just to be like, this is just normal life and things don't have to have like new, weird, high pressure rules. It's still just people meeting each other and being friends or not being friends.
Keeping a sense of perspective.
Yeah. And as far as roommates, I think I got very lucky. I really get along with my roommates. I love them. But I think it really does depend on whether or not you're sleeping in the same room. We're lucky enough to all have our own room, although I sleep in the common room. So for me, it was like I have to be a little bit more figuring out what I need for myself in order to feel comfortable, and feeling comfortable asking things of them, and kind of all meeting each other where you're at. So I think just being very like open, communicative, it's generic advice, but it does help to just be very, I would say just communicative about what you need, what's not working. Make sure to have a friendly tone, keep things as light as possible, because I do have friends who have really unpleasant roommate experiences, and it does just make it absolutely miserable to come home and feel like your home isn't a happy place to be.
Yeah.
That's a terrible feeling. Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't want that.
Yeah.
Now, Eleanor, what about advice for getting schoolwork done? Because obviously you're there for academics partly.
Yeah.
What's your
Yeah.
advice on that?
My advice for that, the biggest thing I would say, even though I am guilty of this, is not doing work in your room, or at least definitely not in your bed, because it's been important for me to keep just work and everything else separate. It's been good to like, I go to the library to do my work, and that's where I get all of my work done. But I'm in the library, it's like I'm not going to be doing anything other than doing my work. And so it just makes it easier on me to separate everything, because then it's like when I'm home, I don't have to feel guilty about not doing work. But the more work I do when I'm home, the more I kind of feel like anytime I'm not doing something, I should be doing work. But then also at the same time, it's like I don't have to because I'm at home. And I find that it just makes me less productive, but more stressed out.
That's great insight.
Yeah. And something else, I think it's just important to stay on top of everything that is urgent that you really need to do versus things that can be longer. Classic time management stuff, but just figuring out some sort of tool. I honestly haven't really nailed down anything that works for me besides just writing down scribbled notes of what's useful. So I should probably work on that. But just knowing what I need to get done. Something also was at the beginning of the year, I was doing all of my readings completely and like thoroughly taking notes on all of them. And that was great, but it really did slow me down a lot. And then I realized most of the people in this class aren't really doing all of the readings. They're sort of skimming some of them or figuring out like what they need to take from them. And that was useful to know, like, what are the actual expectations for the work that's given.
Being strategic about how much effort you put into every single assignment and realizing
Yeah.
they're not all need to be done exactly 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And that the professors aren't even expecting you to be doing that, because sometimes they don't really lay that out clearly for you, especially if, like, a lot of my classes weren't really for freshmen. And so a lot of the people just kind of already understood that. So I think talking to the professors about what their expectations were was really helpful for me, but also just not being too hard on yourself. Like, first semester freshman year, there's a lot that's new and a lot that's going on. And something important for me was I realized I kind of had a moment where I actually had to call you mom, and I was like, there's just one too many things that I'm trying to get done right now. And, like, in order for me to be doing my work and feeling like everything is going well, I need to, like, drop one of these clubs or drop one of these, like, applications that I'm doing. And that was helpful for me to be like, what is the thing that's just one too many things? That's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, and I remember you saying to me, I don't need to do every single thing first semester freshman year.
Yes. Yes, and that is definitely right.
And finally, last question, what's your advice for staying healthy? So college students are sort of notorious for eating junk food, staying up all night, sleeping all day.
Getting mono.
Some people are doing a lot of exercise, some people aren't.
Well, I really am my mother's daughter, but it's, I mean, it's like all goes back to habits.
There you go.
Because I'd say just developing routines so that you don't even have to think about it. And then also, like, developing things alongside other people. Like, it's been good for me to be like, I'm making sure that I'm eating 3 meals a day, which also stops me from snacking, but also just makes me feel better and more productive and regulates everything else, like sleep and when I do my work and everything. It's useful to be like, okay, well, I'm generally going to eat with these people at these times. So then it just keeps me in check. Or, like, this semester, my friend and I are joining the outing club, which is going on hikes in nature, which I feel like is healthy in multiple ways. But doing it with someone else, it's like we hold each other accountable, and it makes it more fun. It makes me more likely to keep doing it. So things like that. And also just having people around you that you feel like have good habits. I feel like all of my friends have good habits, but I think if I was friends with someone who, like, you know, slept in all day or was slacking off a lot, or I felt like was generally unhealthy, I think I definitely would get sucked into that a little bit. So just keeping that in mind is useful. But I think, honestly, it is just kind of the nature of the beast that it's not the healthiest time. So there's always going to be a little bit of that.
Yeah, a little bit of staying up very late and running around and
definitely.
Yeah.
Falling in my case. That was something I discovered. Yeah, I fell a couple times. So yeah, just unexpected things. That was something else. That's like health in more of a medical sense, but having like Pepto-Bismol, and I got probably like 5 or 6 different colds in like a 4-month period.
Yes, yeah.
Which is awful. Like, being sick in school is just so unpleasant, but I was glad to have NyQuil, DayQuil, everything.
So don't stock up on all the necessities, but for the things that you need if you're sick, have them ready in a kit somewhere. That's good advice. Yeah.
I will never forget when I had the flu in college during exams and took Theraflu for the first time. Didn't know it made you sleepy before my 3-hour English essay exam.
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
That will live as one of the worst 3 hours of my life.
Wow. That is, because
horrible.
that stuff knocks you out.
That is terrible.
Well, Eleanor, thank you so much for joining us. It was so fun to have you part of this and to share your experience from freshman year.
Thank you for having me. It's been a long time. My last time on here, I was like 11.
I know. You've come a long way.
Much good advice.
Yeah.
So let us know if you do try this at home and how considering the advice from a college freshman works for you. Let us know on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, Facebook. Drop us an email at podcast@GretchenRubin.com. Or as always, you can go to the show notes. This is happiercast.com/519.
Coming up, we've got a happiness hack about something to consider before you enter a social situation. But first, this break. You know how sometimes a meal leaves you energized and other times sluggish, foggy, or even hungrier? That may be your glucose talking. Foods that are sugar and carb heavy, and you know my experience here, cause your body's glucose levels to spike, often followed by a crash. This matters because it turns out 88% of us have suboptimal metabolic health. So glucose could be the next big thing to track when it comes to health. That's why we're excited about Lingo, a new bio-wearable from Abbott that tracks your glucose in real time.
I've been wearing Lingo for weeks now, and I've learned that for my body, if I move around after I eat a meal, my spike is much more gradual, much lower. And so I've learned that I just need to get up and move around after I eat. What works for me might work very differently for you, but that's what works for my body. To see how your body responds to food and learn what you can do to improve your metabolism, try Lingo. It starts at $49 for a 2-week plan, no prescription needed. For a limited time, save 10% on your first order with Happier at hellolingo.com.
The Lingo glucose system is for users 18 years and older, not on insulin. It is not intended for diagnosis of diseases, including diabetes. For more information, please visit hellolingo.com/US.
It's the new year, and so many of us have made resolutions about how to make our lives healthier or more positive. So for the new year, why not let Audible expand your life by listening? On Audible, you can explore more than 1 million audiobooks, podcasts, and exclusive Audible originals, all in one easy app.
And you can tap into your well-being with titles that will inspire and motivate you. Gretch, you know I love Audible. Right now, I am listening to The Art of Small Talk by Casey Wilson and Jessica St. Clair. I am brushing up on my small talk skills because, that helps both in your personal life and your professional life.
Yeah.
And although I am somewhat of a good talker, I can always get better. Start positive habits and reach the goals you set for yourself. Start listening today. Sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/happier. All right, Gretchen, we are back with this week's happiness hack.
Yeah, so one of the things we talk about all the time is the importance of friendship and social relationships to our happiness, because it's a key, maybe the key to happiness. So one thing that is nice to have is ways to make social relationships and social engagements easier, more pleasant, where you just feel like you're being a good guest, you're being a good host. And I was reading a very charming novel. It's an adult novel by Marjorie Sharp called Clooney Brown. The name of the main character of the novel is Clooney Brown. I knew Marjorie Sharp because she wrote The Rescuers, about the little mice that rescued the prisoner. Did you read this when you were little, Elizabeth?
Yes, I love The Rescuers.
And I think it was made into a movie. So I had no idea that Marjorie Sharp had ever written books for adults. But anyway, she was a very well-known reader of adult novels, so I'm reading those. But so here's the hack. So there's this character of Betty, who's this very, very beautiful and charming person. And she's coming to visit an English country estate. And she walks in and she's meeting the parents of this guy who she's friends with and sort of seeing. And the novel says, but she had brought with her, as the good guest brings a piece of embroidery, a more fruitful topic still. Her mother proposed to decorate her townhouse with window boxes. There were 8 windows and a porch top. Would Lady Carmel be so very kind as to give a few hints on the most suitable flowers for the different seasons? This was a commission after Lady Carmel's own heart. She accepted it with delight, happily prophesying that it would take a long time to work out. And as the novel goes on, you see that Lady Carmel loves talking about this subject. She's making lists, she's drawing up plans, and it's intimated that, in fact, it may not even be true that Betty's mother has these window boxes, but that just Betty had planned ahead thinking, oh, this would be a delightful conversation for Lady Carmel. And so as a good guest, she brought this topic with her, as a good guest brings a piece of embroidery. And this reminded me of a friend of mine who says that every time before he goes to a party or a cocktail party or a conference or whatever, before he goes in, he checks the news. And for something lighthearted and fun, so that if he is having trouble making conversation with somebody, he'll be like, oh, did you see that blah, blah, blah was just nominated for an Oscar? Or did you see that it's the coldest day we've ever had for 45 years or whatever, just as kind of an icebreaker. And I thought this is a really good idea to think about it in advance.
Very good advice.
People say, oh, small talk is shallow and trivial. I don't like making small talk. But the fact is, a lot of times you have to start with small talk before you go show to deep talk and you want to show that you're friendly and make friendly conversation, but it's just hard to know what to even talk about. One of the things I write about in Life in Five Senses is you can often point out something that you're experiencing with your five senses. Like, oh, we're listening to this song. Do you remember who's the artist? Or, oh, have you tried the pigs in a blanket? How do they, which hors d'oeuvre do you recommend? Because that's something that we both share. But I thought this was a good idea too, to think about whether it's just like a piece of news that applies to everybody, or perhaps you take into consideration a particular person and think, well, what would be something that this person would enjoy talking about? And we'll get off on the right foot.
Well, and as we know, Gretchen, many people enjoy giving advice. So asking for advice is usually a safe way into a conversation, which is what Betty did here.
Well, and I didn't even think about that aspect of it, but you're exactly right. People love to share and teach and give advice.
Yes.
Excellent.
And now for Read 25 and 25. Gretchen, this year our challenge is to read 25 minutes a day, every day of 2025. And we're going to be touching on it throughout the year, checking up on it. One thing you and I are doing for our 25 and 25 is the slow read of War and Peace with Simon Hazel, and a lot of listeners have joined in on that.
Yeah.
We're getting into it. We're past page 100, well past.
Yeah, if anybody wants to follow along, it's called Footnotes and Tangents. It's Simon Hasel's Substack. It's super fun. You and I are doing it. Our husbands, Jamie and Adam, are doing it. Our mother already did it once. She's doing it again. Our father is doing it. We're just War and Piecing it up.
Yes.
But Elizabeth, I found a hack that is even increasing my enjoyment of War and Peace, and it's thanks to you.
Oh, what is it?
Well, Elizabeth, you love listening to audiobooks, and you're always talking about how much you enjoy audiobooks. You love listening. You get through so many books that way. And I tend not to listen to audiobooks unless it's a book that I know very, very well. I had loved that novella, The English Understand Wool by Helen DeWitt. I had read it 2 or 3 times. It's so short. I just read it and reread it. And then I decided, I'm going to listen to it because that'll be kind of a different way of experiencing something I love. I love the novel Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I listened to that, just experience it in a new way. So I decided to do the same thing with War and Peace. So I read it with my eyes before I listen to it. But I'm really finding you experience in a book in a different way when you're listening to it. And I'm finding that it really increases my enjoyment of it. And I don't think I would have been so inclined to do this if I hadn't had your example of just loving audio.
Well, Gretchen, I love this idea because I'm also reading it with my eyes, but I'm going to follow suit. I'm going to do this as well. And then it'll also help me keep everything straight because there are so many characters, there's so many names, a lot is going on. So I think listening will reinforce it and just be pleasurable. So I'm going to do that with you.
One of the things I would say if somebody's thinking about doing this is if you're doing it with Simon Hasel, he recommends one of 3 translations. And so I bought the translation that seemed like the one that he was sort of slightly saying he was his favorite. So I got that one. And then when I got the audiobook, I got that one also. I will warn you, I checked one out of the library and it turned out that it was wildly condensed. And the first 3 chapters, I was like, what is going on? And then I realized it was some highly condensed version. So you got to make sure you get one that's the whole text. But now, because the translation is, people who are really deep into translation will often talk about the differences in translation. And I kind of wish I was listening to a different translation, because since we're reading it so slowly, you might remember like, oh, that's interesting that they use this phrase instead of that phrase, or like he ambled into the room versus he sauntered into the room, or like Prince Vasily, was he sneaky or was he foxy or whatever. So if I were going to do it again, I mean, I got the book, so I'm not going to rebuy it. We've got so many copies of War and Peace in our extended family, but I do think that might make it more interesting. It's just to see, what are these choices that translators are making? If you don't speak a language, it's not often that you get a chance to really like notice something like that. I think it would just be another layer. I think I was talking to Mom, and I think she said she was going to try getting a different translation because now she's read her version already, so she would really be able to pick it up.
Okay, I'll do that too.
The whole idea of slow read is by reading slowly, like you can get yourself through a really long book that you might not otherwise undertake, and also you can really take your time and sit with everything that's happening. And so this is just a way to deepen it. So I'm really having fun with it.
Yay! Love all of our stuff for Read 25 and 25, Gretch. So much fun.
Absolutely. And now for a listener question.
This comes from Dave. He says, love your show. I was introduced to your work through the 10% Happier podcast, and I'm working my way through your old podcasts. Currently on number 105, and it got me thinking about snacking. I'm a rebel, so I'm not quite sure how to tackle this problem. My issue is late night snacking. I'm not an obliger, so abstaining completely may or may not work for me. It seems to work for a while, and then eventually I binge. As a rebel, how can I reduce the amount of late night snacking I do? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, great. So I love a question related to the tendencies. And if you don't know what tendency you are or know about the tendencies, just go to gretchenrubin.com/quiz and you can take a quiz and find out your tendency and what that means. But for the purposes of this, we'll just launch in. So first, let's talk about tips for rebels specifically, and then we'll have tips generally. So tips related to rebels specifically, it's one thing to try, Dave, is to think about your identity. So you're not snacking because you're not supposed to, or because you said you would, or because a doctor recommended that you cut back on snacking or something like that. It's your identity. This is the kind of person you are. You're a healthy person. You're a disciplined person. You're a person who sticks to his word. You're a person who can do what he wants. You also kind of related, think about the idea of like, you can't be controlled. Like, oh, big food wants to get me sticking my hand into a crinkly package late at night, but I'll show them. They can't make me. That sense of control. It's always coming back to what you choose. Rebels can do anything they choose and just say like, this is just something that I don't choose to do. It's not about what you're supposed to do. It's like, that's not the kind of person I am. That's not what I choose. And then I will throw in just something that I thought was very funny that a rebel told me. This rebel had very healthy eating habits. And I said, how as a rebel do you have very healthy eating habits? And he said, every morning, first thing, before I've eaten anything else, I have a piece of hard candy because I could never have hard candy as a kid. And I'm like, I can do whatever I want and I'm going to have candy before I even eat breakfast. And they said, because I do that, then the rest of the day I eat healthfully because I'm like, look, I already had my candy. I can do anything I want. And I choose to eat healthfully. And so I thought that was funny because it's just going to this idea of choice and making your own decisions for yourself. So lean into identity. So those are the ones that I would say maybe are rebel specific. But Elizabeth, offer up some of the ones that are more general.
Yes. Always effective is the strategy of inconvenience.
Oh, yeah.
So make that snack food hard to get to.
Yes, works better than you imagine.
Don't buy it in the first place. Just pass by it at the grocery store. That is definitely extremely effective.
Yes.
One that people find really useful is to brush your teeth. So brush your teeth to go to bed earlier.
Yeah.
And then you might be less likely to want to have a bag of chips and mess up your nice teeth. Close down the kitchen. This is like turn off the lights, start the dishwasher, close the cabinets. It's like the kitchen is closed for tonight, like a restaurant kitchen.
And then something I would add from writing Life in 5 Senses is find a different sensory stimulation, because I think sometimes people snack because we're just trying to give ourselves like a little jolt of energy or a little treat. Sometimes if you run your hands through clay or yarn, or I often will put on perfume even at night because it just gives me sensory stimulation, or splash cold water on your face or plunge your hands in cold water. Any sensory stimulation or sensory shock can give you that little bit of energy. It's something to try.
Good advice. Good luck, Dave. Let us know how it goes. And coming up, Gretchen, you give yourself an email demerit, but first this break. Okay, we are back with demerits and gold stars. And this week, Gretch, you are up with a happiness demerit.
Okay, so I have 2 emails, and you've said I'm very email-centric. People often have like a dominant form that they use. I'm definitely email-centric. And I check my main email many, many times every hour. So I'm on top of that email. I have another email as well, and it's a real email. It's not a fakey email. It's an email that's legitimate, but I only check it once every few weeks. I always forget that it's there. And that's a problem because since it is a legitimate email, some small group of people end up using it. And then I realize, oh, I've missed something, or I've looked very inattentive to somebody where I would have normally answered them right away. And it's just hard to say to somebody like, oh, I just didn't check my email, because I'm the kind of person who checks my email all the time. And it's funny because I will say to people, you got to use the other email, but it's hard because things will auto fill in. And so it can be tricky to manage. So anyway, I should just get in the habit of checking it every other day or something. It's not a big deal because there's usually not much in there. But if there is stuff in there, I usually do want to see it. And instead, I just let it languish, and then I dread opening it because I'll be like, oh my gosh, I wish I'd answered that a week ago, or oh, I would have gone to that if I'd known about it. And then I get that bad feeling that makes me want to do it even less.
All right. Well, now that you've said it, hopefully you will do it.
Exactly. That's the point of the demerit. How about you, Elizabeth? What is the gold star for you this week?
Well, Gretch, I am giving a gold star to my corgis, Daisy and Nacho, because they were so good when we were at the hotel during the evacuation. You know, we took them with us. There were a lot of dogs in the hotel. Our dogs are barkers, as I have discussed many times.
They do bark.
But you know what? They were so well behaved. They barely barked. They were nice to everybody. They were sweet. It's as if they knew we can't get us kicked out of this hotel. We need to behave. And they did. And they were such a comfort to us. So fun to have them. So gold star to Daisy and Nacho.
Oh, that's so fun. It was so fun to see the pictures of them having their little Eloise moment.
Yes.
The resource for this week, I want to remind everybody, I have a newsletter too. It's the 5 Things Making Me Happy newsletter, and it is so fun to do. It's 5 things, it's research, it's funny observations, pictures, all different kinds of things, just whatever is making me happy. That's once a week, it's free, and then once a month I have a roundup of hacks. I have one that's a roundup of fun things from the podcast. You can sign up and learn more at happiercast.com/newsletter. And Elizabeth, what are we reading in addition to War and Peace, of course?
I'm reading Shred Sisters by Betsy Lerner.
And I am reading The Crow Trap by Anne Cleves. And that's it for this episode of Happier. Remember to try this at home. Consider taking some advice from a college freshman. Let us know if you tried it and if it worked for you.
Thanks to our executive producer, Chuck Reed, and everyone at Lemonada. Get in touch. Gretchen's on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, and TikTok at Gretchen Rubin. And I'm on Instagram and Threads at Liz Craft. Our email address is podcast@gretchenrubin.com.
And here's your writing reminder. If you love the show, leave a review to let us know. We really do value the reviews. That's how a lot of people discover our show. People read the reviews.
They do. Until next week, I'm Elizabeth Craft.
And I'm Gretchen Rubin. Thanks for joining us. Onward and upward.
So, Gretch, what I want to know with your War and Peace audiobook is how long is it?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Let me look. That's a great question. I didn't even think to check. Wow. It's about 60 hours.
Wow. So that's like an intense work week, basically.
It is.
Makes the Barbara Streisand book look short.
Yeah. From the Onward Project.